again. In some of the previous podcasts that I put out, I've spoken about planning for the trips that I do now, and usually they involve a little bit of work or sometimes quite a lot of work. So I'm running, as I record this, I'm just completing planning for a trip to Uganda in less than 2 months now. I'll be there in 2 months' time. However, not everything I've done has been that well organized, and I'm just going to share a story. It's quite a long time ago now. It's back in 1997, so 25 years ago as I record this. And I was living in Cairns in North Queensland in Australia. And basically when I was living there, I was quite into scuba diving, and I would get out onto the Great Barrier Reef whenever I could. And I would take photographs with an underwater film camera that I had at the time. And that was great fun. It was good going out on the boat. It would take about 3 hours to get out to the reef from Cairns. Then we do some diving out there and then come back again. So one day in Cairns, and going back that far back, Cairns was a little bit different. It's been redeveloped since then. I hadn't been there for quite a while, but last time I was there was probably in the order of 10 years ago, 8 to 10 years ago. It had been redeveloped fairly substantially, certainly on the beachfront. So it isn't the town that I knew, which it was a little bit rough around the edges still back then. Anyway, one day I was walking through Cairns, and there was an office for the Papua New Guinea airline, Air New Guinea, and I wandered in there because that's the kind of thing I would do, and just picked up one of their magazines. They had their in-flight magazines just on a rack, and I picked one up because there was an article in there about a guy who was diving in Bootless Bay, which is the bay around Port Moresby, which is the capital of that part of Papua New Guinea, the island, because it's split in half. Part of it is Indonesia, and then there's the other part. And this guy had been diving World War II aircraft wrecks, because in that area in the Second World War there had been quite a lot of activity going on with the Americans and the Japanese primarily. I think the Brits were in there as well. And as a result, there were some old aircraft wrecks. These were aircraft that I believe some of them at least had run out of fuel and had to ditch in Port Moresby in Bootless Bay. So anyway, it all looked very interesting, and I have an interest in flying, as you may know from other podcasts, and also in diving, which I was doing a lot of at the time. And at the bottom of this article, it had the guy's name. It actually had his phone number in Port Moresby. So I just went to one of the public call boxes in Cairns. So this was definitely before smartphones, and we didn't all have mobile phones back then. And basically, I phoned him up and said, "Could we do some diving?" So he was slightly surprised by the phone call, but was up for it. So I arranged to get myself out to Port Moresby. There was a flight from Cairns. I can't remember if it was once a week now, but periodically. It wasn't. I don't think it was every day, but you could fly over there. And basically, I flew over to Port Moresby and stayed in this island resort. So arriving in Port Moresby back then, it was interesting because it was lawless is too much, but people there lived in compounds, and particularly if you were white, you had to be a bit careful because you sort of stood out a little bit. And I'd heard all sorts of stories about people being held at gunpoint and robbed. And there was another story going around that people would steal the springs from windscreen wipers on cars, and they used them as trigger springs in homemade guns. So it was none of that was in the tourist brochure. So it was kind of an interesting place back then. So I did fortunately get picked up eventually. When I got outside the airport, I had attracted a bit of attention, and anyway, stayed on this island resort, which was relatively secure, and the guys were coming to pick me up to go diving the following morning, and unfortunately they were about an hour late because what had happened where they were moored up, they were wheeling a trolley of compressed air cylinders for divers to put on one of the boats, and the trolley went through the wood of the quay, the pier that they were moored up against. So obviously that had been missing a little bit of maintenance along the years, I guess. So anyway, we eventually went out, and I don't know if you're a diver listening to this. So if you are, normally the procedure is that you check your gear out. You have a buddy who, before you go in, you also just check each other's gear, make sure everything's properly put together, that you've got good pressure and all these other things. Well, there was none of that. The guy driving the boat, he was trying to figure out from landmarks roughly where this wreck was. We were looking at a single-seat fighter wreck, I think an American aircraft. And anyway, he figured it was roughly in the right place, just threw the anchor overboard, and I had visions of it just going straight through the cockpit. So no GPS location, none of that kind of sophistication. It was all very much done by sight and by guesswork. And then everyone just dived in. So there was no buddy stuff at all. And I have a feeling it was on that dive that my stab jacket, which is the stability jacket, so you use it to inflate to get yourself neutrally buoyant for one thing, but also when you want to go up, you can inflate it to go up. And that was leaking slightly, so I was sort of rotating very slowly and trying to swim against that as I was swimming around. But it was quite good. And when we got down there, I got some photographs of this aircraft. There was also a little ferry they had, a very small kind of, it was almost a river ferry type thing that had also sunk at some point. So we were swimming around that. And basically, it was quite a nice trip. It was an unusual thing to do. And I met some people, as you do when you travel on these things. And I think I was only there for a couple of days. And the thing that stands out for me was actually the trip back from the island, because I had to leave very early in the morning. I think it was maybe 4:30, something like that. So, or maybe even 5, but that sort of time. So it was before sunrise, and I had to go on a boat from the island to a point on the shore, which basically meant mooring next to a couple of other boats, climbing across those to get to the roadway. And then we had a van that took me into Port Moresby. And on this boat, it was almost surreal, just sitting in this boat. So I was the only passenger. There was a guy up front. You got to imagine it's quite a long, thin boat, maybe a couple of meters wide at best, maybe 4 meters long, something like that. 3-4 meters long, not a very big boat. And at the back there was a guy handling the outboard motor, and a woman with him who appeared to be in charge, who was just occasionally giving him directions. So we're going along Bootless Bay basically, and the mountains are on one side, and I could see these just pinpoints of light every now and again where people had fires. And as we were traveling, there was just that pre-dawn glow. So if you've been out before the dawn, you get that pre-dawn glow before the obviously where the sun is about to come up, and you get some backlighting behind the hill. So that's what it looked like. And it was just a very, very strange experience, with nobody really speaking. This lady occasionally saying something in, and I don't even know what language they speak there. That's how unprepared I was. I just decided to go. And this kind of real, kind of surreal, just these occasionally spots of firelight in the hills, the pre-dawn glow behind them. And then we eventually got there and got to the airport, and I went back to Cairns. But it was just an unusual experience, and it's one that I'm pleased I took. And the reason for sharing this, I guess, is that certainly these days, and I'm not as bad as some people, and I certainly have done trips like when I went across Botswana, my planning for that was literally 5 minutes. I mean, I did nothing. Somebody just said, "You want to do this trip?" The lady who was helping me organising it, and I was trying to fill in a week between being in South Africa and going to Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe. And I really had a glance at the itinerary. It was basically going where I wanted to go, and I said, "Yeah, let's go." So that's unusual. Most of the time, I do a lot of prep. I look at where things are going, and I make sure I've got all my gear, which I did with this one. But it really was a case of throwing my waterproof camera in a bag. There were a couple of other things I needed just for swimming to have under the wetsuit. I'd normally get my scuba diving equipment wherever I was going, so I didn't carry any of that around with me. I think I may have taken a mask with me, but that would have been about it. And it was just an unusual experience, and I kind of just scratched the surface, really. But it was it's something I'm pleased that I did. So as I say, the reason for doing this, for sharing it, is that sometimes it's good to just say yes, or to go with an instinct to do something and see where it takes you. You can have the quite unusual experiences. So this one was good, and as I say, I was doing a lot of scuba diving at the time around the Barrier Reef, and that was really enjoyable. And I got to know the people on the boat I used to go out with, Hitchhiker. I don't know if they're still going, but probably not. I mean, it was a long time ago, but I knew some of the crew, and being a POM, being English with Australians, that was always a bit of ribbing going on one way and another. But this trip was completely different, and it was just going around wrecks, and it was going somewhere completely different. Certainly Papua New Guinea at the time was known for being a little bit risky to go to. So I would say, if you are thinking of going somewhere like that, do take precautions while you're there. Just make sure you have got a pickup, and just look confident. Don't have things where they can be easily stolen. Don't get yourself into situations where there's no help around, potentially. I mean, there's a whole lot of things you can do. So a lot of it is common sense. But having said all of that, going to these places can be good as well, because they're not on the well off the tourist track, and maybe even not even remotely close to it. And you can have the most unusual experiences. So just a very short recollection, I guess. But I was just thinking about this the other day, and thinking that a lot of what I've spoken about has been on the kind of in-depth planning side, which is what I tend to do these days, looking at going to places like Uganda, where I'm going very soon. But if you are in a place like Cairns, where you might have to be taking the right medicines, and I wasn't travelling somewhere that was significantly different in terms of the kind of health threats that were around, the kind of environment I was going to be in. So it really was a case of pretty much jumping on a plane for, I forget how long the flight was, a few hours, and being somewhere totally different, which is quite an unusual experience if you've ever spent a lot of time in Australia. Okay, I will stop now, and whatever you're doing, I hope you have a good time doing it, and I will speak to you again very soon. Bye for now. Oh, and one thing just before you go, please take a look at the 2026 wildlife calendar. That's available now. It's on the website. There's a link below the description of this podcast episode. So please take a look, and I'll speak to you next time. Bye now.